Hi, SOLA Network. My name is Steve Chang. I'm here with Sam George, and I'm so privileged because Sam currently works as a catalyst for Diaspora for India for the Lausanne movement. He's a former engineer, that's we have in common as an engineer. He received his degrees at Fuller, Princeton, and he eventually got his PhD from Liverpool Hope University in theology, researching family, church, and the diaspora. He helped pioneer two organizations, the Urban India Mission and Parivar International. He teaches right now global migration, diaspora missions, and world Christianity, and has authored several books. His latest book is Journeys of Asian Diaspora, Mapping Originations and Destination. He also authored a couple of books on the South Asian groups. One is interestingly called Understanding the Coconut Generation. So, hey, Sam, I want to welcome you.
Thank you, Pastor Steve. Hello, friends at SOLA Network. Glad to be with you this afternoon, morning, whenever you're hearing this. Thank you, Pastor, for the opportunity.
Yes. Now, it says that you are the catalyst for Diasporas for India, for the Lausanne movement. What does that mean?
My title is Catalyst for Diasporas.
Okay.
For the global church. I serve the global church. Every area of concentration or research, mission interest within Lausanne is called an issue group. So the whole world, the global church is divided into 12 geographical regions. And we have some 30 areas of focus of mission. And one of them is diaspora. And every time Lausanne had a global gathering, there are certain areas of focus, of interest that the global church embraces, and we see lots of momentum. So diaspora was a new area of focus at the last Congress in 2010 in Cape Town, South Africa. And over the last 11 years or so, there has been tremendous movement because when people move, it shapes and reshapes Christianity. And so we study how migration is important to the story of Christianity and what God is doing with people and among people, and especially people who are on the move. So that's kind of my area of research. And so helping the church globally to understand and why migration is important to Christianity and mission. And I'm part of the Indian diaspora. My roots are in India. My parents were there. I grew up outside. I traveled around quite a bit. Lived in 5 different countries, speak 5 languages. I get around the world quite a bit on travel. I teach at 5 different universities in Asia, Africa, Europe, and North America, and Central America. So kind of teach one place in the region. More than going to teach, I'm going to learn. I learn a lot from my students. And so this month I'm teaching in Singapore. I'm in Korea and India. Next month, next quarter, I'm teaching in Singapore.
Okay, fantastic. And yeah, you're way smarter than me.
No. I mean, we are all in the same, trying to figure out what God is doing in the world and how to be part of that.
Right. So Sam, you were saying that the concept of the diaspora. Now, Lausanne looked at different geographical regions as areas of focus. But are you now thinking, or is Lausanne thinking, and you're thinking that instead of just thinking of geographical regions, we have to think about people as they move, and so they might be in different regions, but we have to think about them as a common group with commonalities. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think there are threefold kind of focus. Lausanne has a region. So the world is divided by region. So Asia is divided into East Asia, Southeast Asia, Asia, Middle East, and North Africa. So we have regions like that, geographical regions. That still matters. But then we have issue groups, which is largely thematically organized. So we have orality is an issue group. We are focusing on cities, urban realities. So that's kind of global. So all the issue groups, we have a global responsibility. So when I go to Australia, I work with the region in Oceania and Australian regional director. So we have regional directors for each of the 12 regions. And then I am the catalyst. So I work with all the regional director when it comes to migration and diaspora.
Okay.
And then we have the third region is younger leaders. We are intentionally nurturing younger leaders in our community. So all of us we teach in a school or seminary. We also work with younger leaders, 20, 30 years younger than us, and nurturing them and discipling them one-on-one, and have a group of people that whom we can nurture as scholars and future leaders for the global church. So kind of a threefold focus. So my area is catalyst for migration, diaspora, and my area of study is world Christianity.
Okay, thank you. You know, you and I have talked about this, and your latest book, The Journeys of Asian Diaspora, you know, and and you told me it's 3 volumes, and volume 1 just came out. Next volume will come out next April, and volume 3 will come out at the end of next year, I believe, or something.
August or so, July or August, it should come.
Of next year, okay. And thank you so much, and we'll put a link of that volume 1 at least. But you talked about the Asia diaspora, and you talked about Asia geographically in 5 different regions. Can you describe each one of those regions and their primary influences?
Yeah, so Lausanne divides as East Asia is largely Japan, Korea, China, and Hong Kong and Taiwan and all of those regions. Is largely, and then Southeast Asia is Philippines, Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore, Laos to Cambodia, Myanmar. All of that region is Southeast Asia. So each of that has a regional director, and East Asia director is my good friend in Taiwan. We have somebody in Thailand who coordinates, in Malaysia who coordinates our Southeast Asia. South Asia, we have a regional director. He is based in the city of Chennai. He looks after India, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh. So that region. And then we have, kind of Central Asia, Middle East, and North Africa. All of that is separate region. Because India is very huge, Asia is very huge. And there's nothing common, at a continental level. It has lots and lots of unique cultures, religious background, his history, and particularly history of Christianity, how it came to these regions. So those stories are varied, and the complexity of these regions, and the population is huge, diversity is very huge, and all of that is, so we needed to have many regions, and all of us collaborate and work together. So we just completed 2 weeks ago, we did at the Asia Congress, which was a Lausanne Asia conference. It was online, of course, because of the COVID restrictions, we couldn't host it, but we came together from across Asia. So I live in Chicago, but quite involved with the work in Asia. I teach at several seminaries in Asia, so I get around there to Asia and region quite a bit. But I go to Africa, I study about African diaspora. African diaspora is huge. Africa is the most Christian continent now. And Africa is the youngest continent. When young people and Christian faith, the mobility comes as a result. And so we say, if you're a Christian, you will travel. If you travel, you will become a Christian, because most of the migrants of the world are Christians. And when you get uprooted and go, but we're also seeing increase in crisis of, the refugee crisis. And, so when I'm an economic migrant, I went abroad to study, I went abroad to work, I went abroad to build business. I understand that facet of things, ministry, missions, travel to 100+ countries. So I understand cross-cultural global engagement and missionary work, business and travel. I never understood the refugee issue. I was never forced out of my country. I lived in different countries, held different passports, different visas. But I just wanted, when I took over in 2016, my role as the catalyst for the Lausanne movement and able to speak to the whole global church, I wanted to study and understand this phenomena. So I brushed aside, I just took on my research hat and then went to one city in Germany. So that month, Germany has just accepted 1 million refugees to come in. This is out of the Syria and the Iraqi refugee war crisis. And God just opened my eyes to see what God is doing, even in the most, what the Chancellor of Germany called the greatest humanitarian crisis the planet is facing. So I met with the government officials, local churches, state churches, refugee camps. I went and lived in refugee camp in Turkey and Greece and crisscrossed entire Europe, then went to Africa, went to Middle East, several countries, just to studying the phenomena. And I ended up doing a book called The Refugee Diaspora, a mission in the midst of greatest humanitarian crisis. So Miriam and I, another friend of ours, she's a missiologist in Seattle Pacific University. And so we together edited a volume telling the story about the refugee crisis from Iraq and Syria and Lebanon and Turkey and Greece and Germany and England and Canada and America and Brazil and Africa. And so it is a fascinating collection of stories about how God is at work, even in what we call as the greatest humanitarian crisis. But it's just a painful reality when forcefully you displace people, but God is able to work even through that. And then subsequently, there was a documentary film that we generated to create awareness among churches and Christians to know about the refugee crisis and how they can be involved with it.
Okay, so I know you talked about the Far East Asia, Southeast Asia, South Asia, which includes India and Pakistan, Central Asia, a lot of the Stan countries, and the West Asia or Near East. And one of the things I guess you're saying right now is one of the greatest humanitarian crises we have ever known, all the refugees, people who are migrating out of some of these countries, or whether it be Lebanon, Iraq, now Afghanistan, like they are technically refugees from Asia.
Yes, yes. Okay. Because Asian continent spans from Japan all the way to Mediterranean coast. So Israel is part of Asia.
Right.
Christianity is an Asian religion. Yeah.
Jesus was Asian.
In Asia. Yeah. It began in Asia. So we need to see Jesus was an Asian. So when I don't know if you've this is a history about North American history. When 1883, when the Asian Exclusion Act began, Asians are banned from America. Because of the Chinese Exclusion Act was expanded to Asian. And so there was this Nobel laureate, Indian Nobel laureate, Rabindranath Tagore. He visited America because he's a great poet, literary scholar, very highly respected, wins a Nobel Prize. So America won. So universities are inviting him. And so he comes to an American university. I think it was in Boston somewhere, must be Harvard or somewhere, or Yale. And so he, US press wants to interview him and talk to him. And he makes a very sarcastic comment because it is an Asian exclusion law is in place in America. And he said, so even Jesus would not be welcome in America because Jesus was an Asian. So sometimes we think Asian rhetoric is largely East Asian and, Korean and Chinese and, kind of that is the dominant rhetoric because Chinese have a long history of migration into America, and Japanese, community was large and big until the war, Second World War.
Right.
But the difference about the Asian is, I studied in England and I worked with the churches and seminaries there. In England, when they say British Asians, they means Indians. Because Asian is Indians are the dominant group in Asia because India was a British colony and lots of Indians came there and English. India speaks, there are most people speaking English in India than England, Scotland, Ireland, Canada, US, Australia, all put together. So English is a very common language in India. And so lots of people went there to study, work there, part of the British economy, several elected officials, some of the richest people in England are all Indians. And so Indians is the dominant group. So they call British Asians. And when you come here, I studied in California, I lived in California, Asian American always thinks about East Asian.
Right.
So when I go to England, I say that if you call yourself as British Asian, please include our Chinese brothers and sisters and Koreans and Filipinos, because you gotta be inclusive of everybody if you call yourself as Asian. Because I lived in China, I lived in Hong Kong and travel to Japan and Korea. And so I said, okay, you got to include. I know brothers and sisters who are pastors here in the city. And I'll always invite my Chinese friends to come be a part of the, British Asian gathering.
Right.
And so when I come to California, I say, hey, East Asian, are you Asian? And so I said, oh, do you understand what Asia is? Have you traveled across Asia? And, so you need to include Asians and even West Asians.
Right.
If you really call yourself as Asian Americans, because there are many people from Pakistan and Nepal and Iran. Is Iran Asia? So sometimes this narrow parochial view, we all have a geographical sensibility get expanded when we include other people and be more inclusive, to be true to the titles that we carry as Asian Americans.
Right. So now let me ask you, Dr. George. Now, SOLA, we're supposed to be a gospel-centered voice for the Asian Americans, and obviously, just the phrase itself, Asian American, the title itself has a lot of limitations. What do we mean by America? Well, what about those in Canada? Does it mean North America, or what about those in Australia? Would they, if their language is English, etc. But why should Asian Americans, or those who are thinking about the Asian diaspora, why should they think more broadly and include the South Asians as well as the Central and West Asians? Why is that necessary? What's the advantage?
I think about several things. I think in America, those that come to America is always reference continental level. African Americans, Latin American, South Americans, and so at the continental reference point, and Asian American is a broad category that includes even Pacific Islanders, as broad as that. AAPI, that becomes a category by which America sees us, census report sees us, the more dominant culture sees us. So that's one reason. Second, I think there is a lot of commonality across Asia, civilizationally. Buddhism began in India, become a dominant faith in East Asia and Southeast Asia. And we also have a lot of cultural similarity, family orientation, religiosity, community orientation, cultural values are much more common and similar. Work ethics, passion for family and children. So there's a lot of commonality. But most importantly, I will say Christian faith. Christian faith is inclusive. I don't have to become so ethnocentric Christian, a cultural Christian. Christianity, my faith calls me to embrace brothers and sisters from all parts of the world. It is best said in a statement by an African theologian that I love and appreciate. He said, if you belong to Christ, you belong to everyone who belongs to Christ. So I must grow in my understanding of my Christian faith. I have brothers and sisters in every country of the world today. And because, in 2010, I had the great privilege to be part of the Lausanne Congress in Cape Town, South Africa. Christianity Today called it as the most representative Christian gathering in the history of Christianity. By 2010, we literally have a Christian in every country of the world today, every geopolitical entity. So that means there are Christians everywhere. It is not just my four walls of the church, few hundred people that I worship with on Sunday morning. We have a family that is truly global in every nook and corner of the planet. And so if I belong to Christ, I also belong to these people who belong to Christ. So that understanding that we have a truly global, and at least at an Asian level, Japanese Christians and Chinese Christians and Koreans and Filipinos and Hmong Christians and Laotians and Cambodians and Indonesians and Indians and Iranians and Lebanese. And I think we have lots of differences, but also there are a lot of things that can bind us together as a common people, and especially because of the Christian faith. That should be a common thing. And the task before us, what does it mean? The great diversity, not to divide us, but as a strength to be engaged in mission and involved in God's work in the world, and understanding church as a much more global entity, God's people on God's mission in the world. And that must be something that will unite us together across the differences of geopolitical or passports or our ancestry, where it comes from.
Okay, so the advantage that we of thinking of Asian Americans more broadly or more technically, properly, is that there are a lot that we share in common culturally. Family-oriented, work ethics, et cetera, et cetera. But Christ just calls us to think of ourselves more broadly. So, although I may feel more tribal with other Korean Americans, but if our experiences and our cultural background, that my background is very similar to, I share so much with the South Asian American, I ought to be thinking of them as brothers, and my experiences and your experiences might be so similar that if I think of the South Asians as us, that there's an advantage there for the gospel. Right?
Absolutely, absolutely. When I first came to America 30 some years ago, I didn't go to an Indian church. I went to a Chinese church because I was coming from Hong Kong. All my friends were Chinese. And then when I came to Southern California, I came to Pasadena, Fuller. All my friends were Korean friends. Because Fuller has lots of Korean at that time. Right. There were hardly any Indian. And then I went to East Coast. I was at Princeton Seminary. And there again, lots of Koreans and few Chinese and few Africans, but then I'm just kind of, all of that, I had a good, lots of wonderful friends. Somebody by your very name back in Korea, a very dear friend of mine. And I go to Korea, I'm involved with the work there. Lots of Chinese friends, doing a research on Chinese in Chicago over 100 years. So I've kind of moved around, and, of course I grew up outside India. I grew up in a very multi-ethnic, multi-Asian kind of context. So you kind of, and then, travel and work. I used to oversee an entire business operation for Asia Pacific. So all the way from Fiji Islands to Jordan was my business territory. So I traveled across Asia and Pacific for my business responsibility. My office was in California, but my region was Asia Pacific. And so all of that travel just exploded in my mind and my heart to see Asia as much more broader and much more inclusive. And my Christian faith kind of compels me to understand and comprehend the larger Christian community and to be more inclusive of my brothers and sisters who are from a different ethnic and cultural and linguistic background.
Okay, thank you. Now, one of the things that I recently discovered, and maybe it's not that recent, but is that even among the Asian American groups in America, that there's obviously there's a lot of differences. The median income for an Asian American is actually higher than the median age for the white or the majority culture people. The median income for the Indian American is the highest of any of the Asian group. Can you, I think I know, but can you explain why and how maybe it is so different from the perception that we have of the poverty, et cetera, that exists in India, and why maybe the Indians who are in America are representatively different, or
Sure. Yeah, that's a very good question to understand our community. Indians are around 5 million strong. It is the second largest after Chinese. Just overtook 2020 census Filipinos to become number 2 community in the Asian Americans. So 1 million strong, 5 million strong, and this is the most educated and highest income group in America right now.
Period. Just period. Okay, right.
Over everybody else is way high. So highest. So the kind of the if you see, largely it is because the immigration is very restrictive. Who comes to America is largely the cream of the cream from India. Top engineering schools and medical schools and sciences and tech is where they're coming in. And so American universities, started targeting in the 80s people to bring them to the graduate studies here. And before that, it was the healthcare wave. 1965 opened up the floodgates for Indians. Right. Until then, we were not allowed, much like Asians. Very few handful of Indians were here. 65 and 70s were largely the healthcare industry. There's large number of doctors and nurses in India, and there was a crisis here. A lot of them came, and large share of them were Christians. So more than half of the early migration were all Christians, because most of the people who went into the healthcare industry were Christians in India. So nurses and no young girls were allowed to go and pursue a field like nursing. Only Christians will pursue a field like nursing and doctors, because Hindu worldview calls that a young woman not to touch anybody else or touch a blood or touch any kind of, all of that is unclean. And so, young girls were not even encouraged to go to college or study or, not nursing or health industry at all, because their prospect of getting married, future prospects, all of them is undermined by pursuing profession that causes you to touch other men, particularly. So there are a lot of religious baggages and religious beliefs that restricted people. Christianity was liberative. It encouraged young people to study, go to pursue any field that you want. And then a lot of education and healthcare were brought by missionaries from the West. And so they pursued education. They encouraged young girls to go and study. And so they pursued education, a lot of nurses. There were not many hospitals. So 60s and 70s, there was a nursing crisis in America. Lots of nurses were brought in from Philippines and also from India. And then 80s was the higher education wave. Some of the brightest Indian minds started coming in. They won Nobel Prizes and science inventions and space and physics and chemistry. And then 90s was the information technology boom that began to happen too. And so now, 20 years later, we see Microsoft CEO president is Indian, Google chief is Indians, hundreds of companies are headed by Indians. And so they are the brightest minds from India are brought in here. So by virtue of that, the work ethics, bright minds, opportunity that America gave, they climb to the top and they become very, very wealthy. And second reason is also Indian households are dual professional income. So two people working in professional fields and high-tech fields in finance, science, technology, computers, managerial careers, and business. Many of them will quit soon and then start their own businesses. So unlike Chinese who were mostly trading, Koreans were somewhat professionals, but I think Indians were largely high-end professionals, and they become high-income groups in America.
That's fascinating.
They're also the highest educated. Most number of PhDs and MDs and graduate studies among all communities in the US right now falls within the Indian Americans.
Right. I was talking with a doctor friend. He's saying that the Indians are taking over the medical fields. But one thing that I learned just from you is that because of the Hindu culture, girls were not allowed to touch bodies and things of that nature. So they were discouraged not only from being educated, but also from pursuing any kind of health care professions. But it's Christians who encouraged all of that. And so a lot of the men and women who pursued healthcare were Christians. And a lot of them, so and a lot of the ones who came to the United States and not only educated healthcare workers early on, but they were also Christians. That's what you're saying. That I did not know that. That's fascinating.
Yes.
Yeah.
So back in India, Christians constitute technically 2.5–3% of population of India. India is a huge population, 1.3 billion people, and it's a huge country, large population, and so Christianity is probably 75 to 80 million, 3% or so. So it's a very small percentage. But in America, almost 20% of Indians are Christians. Oh. So 5 million Indians in America. Out of that, 1 million are Christians, and there are some 1,500 churches. Almost there's a church in every state in the US, Alaska to Hawaii to everywhere else. But unlike the East Asians, the gateway of entrance for Indians have been New York. So they have been coming the westward and kind of the, coming through the city of New York. And so New York has the large number of churches, just like Korean Americans will be Southern California, or Chinese will be San Francisco, whatever that is. So I think for Indians, it is New York City, New York, New Jersey, Philadelphia. That is kind of the gateway for Indian migration post 65.
Okay. Yeah.
So 20%, 1,500. So 1 out of 5 Indians in America are Christians.
Mm. Would you say, there's a greater percentage of Christians, Korean Christians in America than in Korea? I mean, I'm
That's
sure
right.
you've heard that too.
Yeah.
So,
So, around 80%, 80 to
Mhm.
85% of Koreans in America are Christians. Back in Korea, it is at 25 to 30% of Koreans are Christians back in South Korea.
So the Indian Americans now, is it because now can I ask, were they already Christians and they came, or did they come and become Christians?
Both.
Yeah,
Both. So by virtue of migration, a lot of the early Christians and Christians are much more kind of, migratory and higher education and opportunity. So we find a good number of Christians are more likely to migrate. But also many Hindus and Sikhs, people who wear turban, and a lot of them have turned to Christ here in America. Because sometimes, the Hindu worldview sometimes does not hold ground in kind of a modern Western world. See, remember, Hinduism says not to travel. You're supposed to live and die in a place close to where you're born.
Oh.
If you're left your native land, you become polluted. And because all the sacred rivers are in India, you had to go back and die. Your remains has to be floated on the holy Ganges.
Yeah.
Purification rites are only available there. Every migrant, when they return back to India, you had to go through special rituals and pujas and rituals to enter back into the temple or enter into the house and eat a meal with your family, because you are outcast. Literally, you're an outcast if you're migrated out, because you have broken the law of what we call as Kalapani, black waters. You cross the waters. And so it's a migrant resistant society. Nobody wanted to travel. So ancient history, many nations, Arabs and Jews and Africans and Greek and Chinese have come to India for centuries. But Indians will never travel out because the Hindu worldview is very, very restrictive. We are supposed to live close to where you are born. And when your father dies, the son is supposed to light the funeral pyre. So generations were bound together to a geography. Right. So it's like a patriarchal ancestral worship, some of those East Asian cultures in China that we see, where generations are bound to a geography.
Right.
But migration breaks the bondage and displacement breaks the bondage. And when you come to Western countries, you're comparing, contrasting some of the values and beliefs. Does it hold ground in a foreign country? Sometimes it does not. So many Indians who have migrated outside have embraced Christian faith in foreign countries.
I see. That's another thing I did not know. So the very fact that when you find an Indian in America or anywhere else in the world, the very fact that they've migrated out shows that they've at least opened their minds to a different worldview, and so they're more ripe for the gospel.
They're very open, but just that those who came to America particularly are very educated people. So you just need to be mindful. They're a little philosophical. They like to argue, but many of them are open to the gospel.
Okay.
They don't find an option to go back because having to endure all the rituals and But of course, Indian Americans are seen very successful, wealthy, achieved much, including our vice president of our country. She's half Indian.
Right.
And so all of that success, success orientation is big. Especially among Indian immigrants. Okay. So some of these religious values, they themselves, they will be the first one to throw out all these religious beliefs. And they don't believe in all this. But at the deep down inside, there's a sense that my soul is polluted. I need cleansing. If the gospel can come in, Christianity is not bound to a geography. We don't worship a place. Mecca, Islam is again geographically centered. We turn towards Mecca and pray. We do pilgrimages to Mecca, which is a required tenet of Islam. Hinduism is also grounded and rooted and imprisoned to a geography. Christianity is not bound to a place or a culture or a language. We worship the person of Christ, who is Son of God. And so our center of our faith is Jesus, and he rose again. He's not buried in a place in Jerusalem. You might do Holy Land trips, but we are not bound to a geography.
Right.
because he's alive. He's a living person. He's moving about. God is on the move, and that's why we move. And so understanding a Christian faith from a migratory lens, it is so liberative.
Yeah.
And we are tied to the person of Jesus Christ, not to a land, not to a culture. That's why we translate our Bible,
Right.
because scripture is translatable. Christian faith is transportable,
Mm-hmm.
all because there's no holy language. Of
Mm-hmm.
course, somewhere in Korea, I have heard when you go to heaven, we'll be speaking Korean. But when I go to Latin America, they say it'll be Spanish. When I come to Kerala, my ancestral homeland, they'll say Malayalam. That is the language of heaven. And then somebody in China said, heaven should be speaking Mandarin.
Right.
So everybody thinks, but heaven will speak all the languages.
Right.
Revelation says, I saw the great multitude from every nation, every language and culture and people and nations. So Christianity is a multi-ethnic, multicultural, global faith.
Okay.
And so we are tied to the person of Christ, and not to a language, not to a sacred language. We have no sacred language. All languages are sacred because Jesus chose to incarnate, enter into the world, and come alive in every language, every culture, through men and women who chosen and committed their allegiance to this Jesus Christ.
Amen. Thank you so much. I'm going to maybe ask like one last question. I know I've gone longer than I had anticipated, but I'm learning so much. I'm in school right now.
No, you're welcome. This is all my migration fundas.
Right.
This is my, diaspora things. I've written about it.
And we're just scratching the surface. One of the uniqueness of the Indians who migrate to United States, and the reason why you can have call center in India as opposed to in China or Korea is that Indians, English is like a national language, and so the Indians come fluent in English as opposed to the Chinese or Koreans, etc. How does that impact? And I know one of the things that it allows you to be more educated quickly, etc., assimilate more quickly in terms of jobs and things of that nature. How does that impact an Indian ability to assimilate, or is there still this wall? So what is an Indian immigrant experience, and how is that different from other Asians who come?
Yeah, I mean, as much as we say Indians are educated, wealthy, educated, that's kind of definitely the profile. But that doesn't mean it's a model minority. There are many people who have a very, very difficult reality of struggles of immigration. But language is a strength for Indians. Unlike Korea, India is not just one language country. India is so huge, and there are so many different languages. So official languages itself is some 15 languages. So if you count all the dialects and all, it's several thousand languages are spoken in India. So every Indian will speak 2 or 3 languages. Mm-hmm. So our schooling system itself is a 3-language system. So every kid, by the time they finish 5th grade, they know 3 languages. And some of them are very, very polyglot. They 5, 6, 7 languages. It's common among many parts of India, many people. So language. And then most of them who study professional fields or go to college, all of them will end up learning things in English. So English is one of the languages. So one we call as legal and business language of India is English. We have a national language, which is Hindi. We have a regional language, which is, every state has their own region. Then you'll have your own mother tongue or the dialect that you speak. So most Indians will have 3 or 4 languages skill minimum. So they're well versed in English. So it is part of the British colonial legacy. When Britain, ruled India for some 200 some years, they left behind English. And much of the people, the clerical staff, the workers, the work for the army, the military, to the administrators mechanism was completely managed by Indians, and they were all learning English just to work with the British. So India has more people speaking English than England and America and Canada all put together. 500-600 million Indians speak English. They may not speak Queen's English or American accent. They have their own, accent, and hybridization has happened of English language with various Indian languages in India. So those who speak Hindi and English, there is something called a hybrid language called Hinglish. They blend these languages and speak mixed together, like Korean and English people mixed together, or Chinese. And so there is a lot of people speak English. So that in a way helps them, because when they come to university or college, most of the undergrad they have done in English, they know the terms and definitions, and they followed probably the same books as textbooks in their undergrad. So that kind of helps them when they come as colleges or workplaces. Sit in a meeting in a software company, half of them are Indians anyway. And so they all, transact business, interact with them, take business from American companies and take them to India. Voice services to IT services to legal services to back office operations and software testing. Much of the software is all in, English. And so they have an advantage, definitely has a strong advantage to know. But then they have the ability to adapt. They're quick to learn a language. If another language is thrown in front of them, they are quick to ready, because they already have learned 3, 4, 5 languages. And then with the computers, they know 4, 5 languages in computers. And so when computers develop a new language, they're quick to learn before anybody else. And they're able to develop solutions and applications on that software and that application platform. So just adaptability, flexibility, diversity is part of the core value of Indian civilization and most Indian people. So if you travel just 50 miles from where you are in India, you will hear a different language. You can't understand anything, different customs, different food habits, different clothing, different celebrations, everything. So India is very, very diverse. It's not just one country. In a way, it is several hundred countries. Right. And so all of that diversity kind of, is the strength, and they understand and they adapt, and, quick to learn, and, very flexible in their thinking. And all of that is a very strong, it's a strength for them when they come to a place like America, which is very diverse.
Okay. And I'm learning still so much. And that the average Indian is very flexible, because they've had to. The average person speaks minimally at least 3 languages, especially if they've been educated. I don't know if you've heard this. Like, do you know what you call a person who speaks 3 languages?
Trilingual.
2 languages?
Bilingual.
1 language?
American.
Yes. There you go. Good. I'm glad you have a sense of humor. Dr. Joy, I have so many more questions. I'd love to maybe schedule another conversation with you and maybe Jay Thomas or someone else, and we can talk a little more for you to. There's several key things that I learned today to help me better understand the Indian American, also what's going on around globally. Why it's important to partner, or to talk at least, and to help each other out for the sake of the gospel. So absolutely. Thank you, Dr. George. I so appreciate you today. I'm looking forward to further conversation. Also, congratulations on your book, and I hope I'm going to pick it up today. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, Pastor Steve, and the team at SOLA. Appreciate the network and all that you do, and Korean community and the East Asian community are strong. We need to continue to dialogue, learn, collaborate, work together for the sake of the kingdom. And so many new opportunities ahead of us. We are living in an exciting time in the history of Christianity, and we have so much more to collaborate and work together. So thank you for the opportunity. Blessings on you and your listeners, and those who watch your SOLA Network podcast. And thank you very much.
All right. Yeah. Okay, don't leave yet. Okay, so we'll just cut the person will edit all that out. But that was so fun. I learned so much, and the more I learn, the more I realize how much I don't know.
Isn't that how it is? When we travel, when we meet people, there's so much we can learn from each other. Mm-hmm. Somehow we get into the silos that we stay there. We think we know everything. We know so little.
Right. I was talking to someone from China Partnership the other day, mm-hmm. and how she was saying that And one of the things that they're doing is that they're trying to bring work and writings from the house church movement out in China and bring them to the English-speaking world. And so they're publishing a bunch of things. And we're talking about how still the perception out in the world is that knowledge and expertise, even among Christianity, it flows from the West outward to the other parts of the world.
I think that is changing. So now we say that mission is not just from the West to the rest. It's from everywhere to everywhere.
Right.
And so I just wrote an endorsement this morning for a book about out of Africa to the rest, how Africa is rising as a mission force. Remember, Africa is the largest Christian continent now.
Wow.
700 million Christians in Africa.
Wow. Right.
And Africa is also the youngest continent. Young people. Okay. So, when Christianity comes, young people, they will travel.
Right.
So they're talking about this African diaspora. And so that book is just going to press, I think, end of the year. So they asked me to write the endorsement. So I read the whole thing. Very exciting how Africa is rising as a missionary force. Much like, Koreans have sent missionaries around the world. Right. Now Koreans, Africans are going as missionaries all over the world.
Right.
And in fact, China has become the #1 place for African students.
Really?
No more England, no more America or Canada.
They're going to China.
#1 destination for international students, for African students, is China.
Okay. And China
has invested heavily in Africa.
In Africa, I knew that, and so China is right now a very enigmatic place. They're both at the same time very global in their desire and ambition, but very protective of their own legacy and culture.
But Christianity is exploding. By end of the year, China may be the largest Christian country. Explosive growth. I've been closely monitoring Chinese Christianity, and I have many friends in there. And so it's a happening thing. Chinese are sending more missionaries now.
Right. I think a friend of mine, a Chinese pastor, is saying how the Roman roads helped the gospel to travel, and he's saying that it's the Chinese diaspora that may be the thing that God uses, because they're everywhere.
Yeah, Chinese have built the rail network now.
Yeah.
So I was in Berlin a couple of years ago in Germany. I saw the first train arrive there from Beijing to Berlin.
Isn't that amazing?
Train is running all the way. Imagine that expanse. Right. So the roads are, instead of road, they're building the high-speed train.
Okay.
I mean, we still can't pass a transportation bill in America. China China has more high-speed rail than the rest of the world put together now.
Right.
Just in the last 15 years.
Right. Yeah.
The amount of investment that they have done in high-tech infrastructure and airports that they built, unbelievable. But what will happen? It's like the Roman roads. People will move. That will be the largest impact of this. I've written about this phenomena. I traveled on the new Chinese, the roads, and went to several cities, and so we are closely monitoring that. So Roman roads was not about Pax Romana, not about Roman civilization, not about the Roman Empire. Gospel travel there.
Right.
God is just using the Chinese to build all this, so that I'm projecting close to 100 million Chinese will come to Central Asia and Middle East and Western Europe.
Right.
100 million.
Yeah.
And so out of the 100 million, 70 million will be Christians.
Wow. So like what Western Christianity could not do in Central Asia, when Central Asia opened up, like the church kind of, they failed. The Muslims came and succeeded. But perhaps the Chinese will come and succeed with the gospel. Yeah.
Koreans did some, Chinese did very little, but I think this, because at that time, Chinese Christianity was very, weak at that time.
Right.
But now the vibrancy and the missionary passion that they have, they are evangelizing people like crazy.
Right. And they know what it means to suffer. They know what it means to do church underground.
And they're not using the American model or the Western model. I mean, that is the strength.
Yeah.
See, Korea and India, we all followed the Western model, evangelization, the tools, church planting, blah, blah, blah. they are using a different, evangelistic model.
Okay, we need to have another conversation about this.
But, it is an exciting thing to talk about.
Dr. George, there's a conference coming up in April. You can look at our website. It's for the Asian American Leadership Conference. If you can be here in California for that, we'd love to connect with you and just
tell me when is it in Asia? When is it in April? I'll look it up.
Yeah, I think it's April 27th through the 29th, Monday through Wednesday, I think.
Okay. Just send me some details if you have.
Right.
I'll plan for that. I know I am teaching in Singapore in April, but I should be back by then.
Okay. All right. I'll send you something. But Dr. George, thank you so much for your time.
Okay. Thank you, Pastor Steve.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Bye-bye. Blessings.